Hey, what's going on?
Hey man, it's so good to meet you. This is an honor. I absolutely dig your work. I appreciate you taking a minute out today, man.
Oh, yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me on. What's
Yeah.
going on? How's things where you are?
Oh, I'm in Kansas City, Missouri. It's all good. We're making it through. All right. So where are you at in Canada?
I live in Windsor, Ontario. It's just across the river from Detroit.
Dude, I thought someone was gonna fucking crush me back in the 90s. I went to Seattle during the whole grunge thing, and I
Yeah.
rented one of those like little mopeds, and I
Okay.
had some gearhead behind me in a massive truck, and I'm like, this is it. I'm gonna be an ink spot, and that's just the way it is. And somehow I got out of it, but they sniffed me out. They knew that I was a tourist. They were on my tail, and somehow I got out of it, and it was good. But I remember
Crazy.
reading Alan Lightman's Einstein's Dream on a bench up there, and it was the coolest experience to this day that I've had reading a book. It was so
Cool.
serene. I was in this beautiful place. It was lovely.
Yeah, I've written a few more than a few songs across the river from Detroit. It's quite a an inspirational sight to see. To look north on the US is something that a lot of Canadians don't get to do. So it's pretty privileged place to
Yeah.
be.
Well, I got to tell you before we get into your work, I love the way the Canadians roll. You guys always respond to legislation. When we had that massive shooting in Texas, you
Yeah.
all responded quickly. You give grants to artists. You have socialized medicine. I fucking love you guys. It's
Well,
just good.
yeah, I think we're we're lucky for those things, but I mean, at the moment, we are kind of living in this sort of ominous environment where they're pretty under threat, which is kind of just you know a telltale sign of the times, but also those things are very fleeting, and I think a lot of Canadians tend to take them for granted, but things are definitely changing here, and hopefully not for the worse. But we have someone who's running for election right now who's running on a platform to kind of take a lot of those things away. So
Wow.
we uh we like to think that they're kind of set in stone here, but they're really not.
Nothing ever
And,
is.
and it's
And
funny because it's cool you mentioned that in a way. uh Canadians kind of, like, in a lot of ways, like, socialized medicine is kind of our equivalent of the Second Amendment or something. It's always been this kind of like nonpartisan. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say that about the second, but I mean, like, in a lot of ways, okay, in the way that you always have Democrats that sort of preface gun control arguments with, like, we're not here to take your guns away.
yeah,
It's like, whenever a conservative talks about changing Canadian healthcare policy, they always kind of have that preface too, in the sense of, like, we're not here to take your healthcare
yeah,
away, but it's easy for that to happen
yeah,
because um I mean, at least it seems that way now. We'll see what
yeah,
happens in the next couple of years, but it's definitely, like, there's a huge paradigm shift in Canadian society right now, and I don't really know how it's going to end.
yeah. We've gone through that sea change here for sure.
We've watched it happen,
Oh
and
my
it's
God.
and that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that it's pretty easy for those things that you always associate with being from a place you're from, and then one day you wake up and that place is not the place it used to be, and it happens pretty quickly, and people don't think that it will.
Yeah, that's well said
um
for sure.
we've always, Canadians have always kind of, like, uh at least, my generation always sort of looked at the States as this kind of, you know it's like any country, it's got its flaws, but
Yeah,
it also has this really kind of inspirational, entrepreneurial spirit, and on a grassroots street level, I mean, more often than not, Americans have found a really incredible way to coexist with each other peacefully, and I think that that's overshadowed by a lot of the kind of more sensationalized stories that emanate from a country that you forget is as big as it is. Like, there's just so many of you that I see it as kind of this inevitable thing, unfortunately,
yeah,
that bad things are going to happen when you just get 300 million people in one
yeah,
place and you're all participating in this kind of historic experiment.
yep.
um it's not always going to go the way you want it to,
True.
but for the most part, I mean, um especially, like, living here and going to Detroit all the time, it's always blown my mind how, despite its reputation, everybody genuinely works together and gets along and acts on a communitarian level from the ground up. And I sometimes don't really think that you could see the same thing happening in Canada in the same way. Like, I think that Toronto's a city, for example, that's way more cutthroat and um, bloodthirsty than people give it credit for. Which is one of the
Interesting.
reasons why I left. But Detroit, I kind of would argue that it's actually a more polite and peaceful place.
That's such an
But
interesting perspective for us Americans to hear from you saying that, because I think we feel like down here with all these bozos that are running around with microphones in their face
sure,
and low IQs, that we feel like that they're all waiting and inching towards some level of civil war,
well,
and
and
it's
that's
fatiguing.
that's what I mean. It's like, we've we've been lucky enough, I think, to live through, not just in America but in Europe too, probably the most peaceful time in human history.
Yeah,
And that's sort of what I'm getting at, is that, just like here, how I think that it's unfortunately kind of taken a turn for the worse. We've seen that happen in the States as outsiders, and
yeah,
we've seen how quickly it can all change. I mean, in my lifetime, I remember, uh, just trying to compare the States, pre and post 9/11, or pre and post COVID, or pre and post Trump. It's like these things seem like they take a really, really long time to kind of unfold, but they happen in the blink of an eye. And
true.
it's pretty wild, because no one's safe from that.
Yeah.
Change happens quick.
Yeah, absolutely it does. Well, let's get into the good stories here, the good work, and peel back the onion layers of your life. Here Goes Nothing. I've been really hitting a renaissance with audiobooks, and I swallowed this up fast. I just take it in
Great.
auditorily. I love the way you did this. I love the music. It sounded like a poem. The whole thing was so well written. It was like one poem after the other. I had to like, there was times where I turned the radio off because I'm like, I got to focus, because the way you described the road, it just all came together. Was it a cathartic jaunt for you to put that book out?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of written simultaneously with the first one, Berlin Warsaw Express, so that the writing of those two books sort of uh, went, like fell on a timeline of about 2.5 years, where the initial kind of sketches of them came out pretty quickly. And I wrote them on tour, so they have. I like to think that they have this kind of rhythmic quality that was inspired by the railroad and the van wheels turning kind of underneath me. And actually, there's a lot of in Here Goes Nothing. There's a couple scenes that take place in KC, which is pretty funny. Um, I remember I went to Arthur Bryant's one time
Yeah.
before the show, and it was pretty great. Uh, but yeah, I tried to kind of channel that into the audio book, and it was a ton of work. Um, but the publisher seemed really interested in trying, a musical audiobook, which that they'd never done before. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
people have, but it was a bit of a leap of faith for them, and it was a long time coming on my end. I mean, scoring your own book is not easy, but I'm
Yeah.
glad it happened the way it did. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, the way you described it is kind of what I was going for. I wanted to have these little vignettes, almost, of glimpses into these moments that kind of, when you put them all together, uh, form the structural kind of backbone of an entire narrative, which in this case, in the cases of those books, was a tour, and how a tour unfolds, and how it plays out in someone's life, and how there's all these things you can learn from, um, being away from home really for only 3.5 or 4 weeks or something, but they have this really profound trajectory on the rest of how your life unfolds. And when you're living your life kind of compartmentalized or incrementally, where you're visiting a city, or you're playing a show kind of one at a time, your life sort of does become this series of vignettes that are sort of told in one story at a time, that amass this bigger narrative that kind of envelops you later.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was totally the idea. And um yeah, I'm just really glad they were up for the idea of putting music to it, despite how long it took me to do.
Yeah.
So
Well, the funny thing about this is that I was so moved by the book. I really, really wanted to interview you. And I literally, right after I sent the email, that vignette about Kansas City came up. And
oh, sweet.
I didn't realize that there was this lore about barbecue joints burning down because Gates burnt
Yeah,
down.
yeah,
It's a thing.
it's the
So when
total
you were
thing. Yeah, it's
and
the thing.
you did that throughout the book, like, don't make decisions when you're
Yeah.
high or you're on the road. It's bad, and I get that. You got to just
Or
hold off.
and as a metaphor, like, there's, like, I mean, this sounds maybe kind of snobby or something, but I don't really work with a lot of musicians that haven't put in a lot of road hours, you know, and maybe for better or for worse, the people that I bring on tour, you know, I really, what matters to me more than their, you know, musical ability or whatever is that they know that, you know, like a 9 a.m. lobby call is actually an 8:45 lobby call or
Right.
whatever. So,
Right.
you know, like that's the stuff you can't really teach somebody. You can teach somebody how to play bass, but there's like a work ethic and
Yeah.
an ability to be resilient that's kind of inherent to someone.
Yeah.
So in that regard, you know, as a metaphor, in the way that, you know, there are people, and I've met them in KC, who, you know, refuse to go to a barbecue that hasn't burnt down at least once. There's musicians like me that, you know, will only, you know, seek out or hire people who have been in the depths of that lifestyle and knowing what is involved in it, you know.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the idea of that was this metaphor that I only really want to surround myself on the road with people that have been to the very bottom or burnt down or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great metaphor. So, you know, you obviously wrote this book when you were younger and you've been through a lot of things throughout your life. Do you still like the road? How has that idea evolved for you?
Yeah, it's weird, man. I have a pretty tempestuous relationship with it, especially lately. Like I took a ton of time off. I put out a record in March and toured pretty much straight through to the beginning of September. And I moved here and my life is going super well. And more than ever now, I just really enjoy being at home. And that's been a kind of a huge paradigm shift in my end. I mean, I'm doing shows here on a regular, like almost weekly with my partner Sheila, and her and I are promoters here. So we've been kind of like, I've kind of taken what I've learned about, you know, putting a show on from uh you know, the artist perspective, and sort of applied everything to the other side of the stage, which is pretty fun. um and yeah, at this point in my life, like I'm just kind of a bit burnt out. I've been
Yeah.
touring nonstop since spring of 2021, and now I'm just kind of trying to settle in and, you know, find my footing in a new place.
Yeah.
um so that's why it's kind of funny that you asked me to do this, because normally, you know, if you're in between releases or something, like no one gives a shit about you.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so it's kind of interesting giving an interview with someone about how sick of touring you are,
Yeah.
because usually you're trying to tell someone that you're all excited to play 28 shows and that everyone should
Right.
come and see them. But right now I'm in like a totally different opposite headspace.
Yeah.
Um a follow-up to Here Goes Nothing will have to come out at some point. I'm kind of been unsuccessfully trying to finish it for the better part of two years. So at some point that book will come out, and then I think that that's probably going to be my next release. And if and when that happens, that'll be my next big outing.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. You know, your books are really probably epiphanies to young musicians that are out there. When they read that, there's a lot of wisdom that's coming from that. What's the best advice that you've ever gotten? What's advice that you've gotten that resonates with you?
I think the best thing you can do from the youngest age is to have no expectations and never assume that anything's happening until you're in the midst of the experience. Because I think more than anything, what burns people out more than booze or sleeplessness or whatever is just disappointment. I mean, that's the thing that um can really kind of make you want to stop, I think.
Yeah.
And you can't be disappointed if you don't go into it um expecting something that's, you know, not what you know, expecting something other than what's actually just going to happen, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, uh you know, everybody wants to get signed to a label, and everybody wants to get a booking agent, and everyone thinks that they're the one anomaly that's going to make it to the top. But if you just go in to every show with nothing more than the goal of just playing the show that's in front of you, I don't think you'll be unhappy, you know. And you could probably, and it's a lot like rock climbing or something, where they teach people to just sort of look at the stone in front of them and, you know, never look at the summit of the peak. It's kind of like that. You just have to take it one step at a time and be really, really, really level-headed about exactly the thing that you're doing at that moment. And like, I'm no expert at that. It's like way easier said than done. But
Yeah.
I think that if people condition themselves at a younger age and a younger point in their career to start doing that, I think that you'll have a lot of success, or whatever that means. And I think that the other thing is to, you know, not worry about chasing fame. I think that a lot of the people I know that have had the most successful careers are the people that are in a lot of ways the least successful, because you know, there's, if you think about, you know, the idea, all the music industry bullshit and the mechanisms of like, of, you know, that whole enterprise mentality of like upgrading rooms and selling out arenas and blah 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 and all this stuff, and TikTok now, and trying to like, you know, pander and acquiesce to the bullshit of Live Nation and everything like that. I mean, there really is only two directions to go. There's up and there's down, you know. And I like to think that, you know, myself and a lot of contemporaries that I've got have a way more interesting, varied, and unique path. And you know, I mean, I've been able to carve a living out, you know, carve out a living doing this for a long, long time. And I mean, I know other people who, you know, were like this super hype band, and then something happens, and then it's like a pretty steep fall to the bottom, so to speak. Yeah. So that's another thing. I think, like, worry about just, you know, making enough revenue to pay your band, and don't go broke doing it. And if you can do that for a long enough time, then you've made it.
Yeah. So let me go back to the beginnings. You obviously have the heart of an artist, multifaceted. What was the first concert that you saw that blew you away, that made you think, I want to be on that stage?
I mean, it'd be bands that no one outside of the town I grew up in would ever know. You know, I
Right.
mean, there was a band actually called the Franklins from Edmonton that changed my life. It was probably like the first time I'd ever seen a band that, you know, consisted of people that I could actually go and talk to after the show was over. That genuinely blew my mind, like amazed me.
Yeah.
And that was a pretty eye-opening thing, because you know, before that, every band I'd seen was like some huge band, you know, like my dad took me to Green Day or some shit. And
Yeah.
that was like this unattainable thing. And then seeing local bands in Edmonton, I mean, that was really what had probably the most profound effect on my life. That was probably what had, you know, like just countless bands, like a Rolodex of bands of like just local punk bands. And that's the stuff that really changes your life, I
Yeah.
think, because, you know, they're the people that are actually like doing the work to make the show happen. Like they're taking the cab to the gig, and they're hauling the amp up the stairs, and they're doing all the bullshit that, you know, big ticket bands don't have. They're paying other people to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's what I'd say. I mean, any, and I think that goes for any kind of localized or regional music scene that's healthy, is that, you know, like ultimately every band on earth is a local band, and people forget that too. It's like, you know, no matter how successful a band is, they still on some level like occupy a space in their community, and they interact with people that live there. So, you know, it's kind of this, like, it's a bit of a dirty word. Like when you go to a record store and you go to the local section, it's like kind of, it's like they've been banished to the dungeon or something. But I mean, every band is in a section like that somewhere.
Yeah. So if you could run into that kid that was in the book, Here Goes Nothing, and you have a dream tonight, and that version of you comes to you, you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on where you're at now, the wisdom you've gained. What advice would you give that version of you?
Um, I'd have to really emphasize the fact that, um, despite what you might think about your career or money or anything, like nothing lasts forever. That's like the biggest thing. I mean, you know, especially when I was younger, I was in some record deals that were pretty lucrative, and I had really, you know, really great relationships with labels that were going to the ends of the earth to make stuff happen for me. And, you know, time and time again, that well has just kind of run dry. And I think in my early 20s, when I was kind of starting out, you know, you just kind of, if it's the only system, you know, you kind of just assume that that's just the system and it's always going to be that way, but it's like really not. And I've over the course of the last 15 years of touring, I've seen so many changes in the music industry and in how artists are paid and in the way that audiences interact with them and in, the expectations of what bands are, supposed to do in terms of touring. And like, it's so radically different now. And in a way that I could have never foreseen when I was, 19 or 20 because of just technology or gas prices or anything like that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would tell myself to just always put money away, never get too comfortable, and to be really, really, really grateful for whatever good things come your way, because, good or bad, it's just nothing lasts.
Yeah, for sure. So let me ask you this. Everyone out there has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, readers, listeners, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I like to think that I've just cultivated a career based on a work ethic and a philosophy that I developed when I was really, really young that hasn't really changed all that much. I think that the things that pissed me off about the music industry when I was 16 piss me off even more so now.
Yeah.
I'm pretty stubborn in that regard. And, for better or for worse, I've kind of worked myself to the bone, trying to find myself opportunities that no one else will give me. And for a long time, I didn't care about any ceiling that was maybe I was gonna hit in doing that. I mean, yeah, I like to think that I'm just kind of a music first, artist first songwriter, and the well-being and the rights of my band and working musicians are always kind of my top priority. And I like to think that I kind of will either do it that way or not do it at all. Again, maybe for worse, I don't know, for better or for worse, but I just kind of refuse to play this game now that's emerged where the music industry has just become kind of a meat grinder for people, and the effects that it has on people's mental health is like drastically negative now in terms of social media and exhaustion, and the things that are asked of you and what's required of you are so different. But I mean, I like to think I've been pretty perseverant through all of that. And that's probably words I would use.
Yeah. So anything that's safe to say that's coming out, anything that's on the burner, anything that's going on in your life right now that you want to put out there, this would
Well,
be the time.
I just did a record with Berlin, now Frankfurt based Canadian songwriter, actually named Old Seed. So that's going to come out soon. We're just waiting for a couple things to finish that up. Hopefully at some point next year, maybe 2025, maybe sooner. I'm not sure, but that was pretty exciting. We recorded that here in this room at the beginning of September.
Yeah.
And that was a great session because actually Craig is his name. He's a character in my first book. He was kind of this like guiding light when I first started touring Europe. He gave me my first sort of slew of contacts and sort of introduced me to that world of international touring, and he's one of those people that kind of turned sitting on a train with a backpack and a guitar into an art form. Like he took I really respected the fact that he took the folk music medium and kind of conceptualized it. So I was really drawn to that. So I'm lucky to be still working with him. And then, yeah, other than that, I mean, we're just doing a lot of shows locally. I think there's probably some touring and a little bit of international touring coming up next year, probably Japan in April, and a Dizzying Lust in some capacity is going to come out in Asia. And then probably a follow-up European run in the fall. Other than that, I'm kind of like, I'm trying to just take things a bit slower these days because, the tank runs out. That's another thing actually I tell my younger self is like, do it while you can, because everybody thinks that they can do it forever and they really, really can't.
Yeah, for sure. Eamon, I got to tell you, man, it's a profound honor to talk to you. I really genuinely believe your heart of an artist and what you're putting out there. It moved me profoundly, and I
Well,
think you're doing
thank you very much.
wonderful,
It's
wonderful work.
really nice to hear that. Thank you so
Yeah,
much, man.
thank you, and I hope I see you in Kansas City, man. Maybe we can break
Yeah,
some barbecue
me
together.
too. Yeah, I would love that. I think KC barbecue is kind of in a league of its own, to be
Yeah,
honest with you. I sort of think that it's better than all the other stuff, just for the burnt ends alone. It's
yeah.
great.
Well, and the way you described that dude when he was ripping the bread and putting it in and the grease on the fingers, you encapsulated that vibe so well.
You guys know it very well, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Hey,
Awesome,
man,
man.
Eamon, it's been an honor. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, great meeting you. See you.
Take care.